So Savio now in, Marmoush to follow as well. This has been a big topic of conversation in the world of transfers, and right here on ESPN FC. James, I'm interested to know your own thoughts on this double move.
Okay, well, I think that most people objectively would say that they've overpaid for Savio, but I think there's more going on here than just the two deals. If Tottenham had paid more than 59 million quid for Omar Marmoush, then Eintracht Frankfurt would have been entitled to a sell-on fee. And I don't think it's an accident that the fee for Marmoush is going to be 50 million plus, I think it's 10, of which 5 is pretty much guaranteed as add-ons. So that gets you to 55 million. And that's strangely close, but under the amount that it would then trigger a 15, I think it's 15%, the sell-on fee to Eintracht Frankfurt. So I wonder, and I don't know this, but I do wonder whether they've slightly paid a higher fee for Savio to effectively get Marmoush for a lower fee. And that maybe what's going on there is they've tried to do that deal to get it over the line to save City a bit of money going out the other end. So that's just something to maybe think about, and maybe in the fullness of time we might hear a little bit more about that. But, you know, Spurs have had to really... The noises were very, very clear very early on that as soon as they avoided relegation last season, they were going to go big in the market this summer. And clearly they have. I mean, they've spent huge sums, and it's been a real departure from what we're used to seeing from Tottenham under, obviously, the chairmanship of Daniel Levy before he, well, officially left, was essentially kicked out. And the ownership kind of remodelled the hierarchy at the top end of the club. So now it's on De Zerbi, isn't it? I mean, this is very much De Zerbi's Tottenham. He has had a heavy say in this recruitment strategy. I mean, somebody like Savio was somebody that Spurs were looking at prior to De Zerbi coming in. They tried to do that deal last summer but couldn't get it over the line. So they've had some sort of longer-term targets. But none of this has happened without De Zerbi's sort of sign-off. And now it's on him to make it work. I mean, he's... You know, as Craig sort of alluded to, it was a disastrous, I mean, not an awful start for them at Brentford. And while I get the argument that obviously they had a lot of players missing, there were one or two. I mean, Archie Gray was captain, I think he was the youngest ever Tottenham captain, actually, at the weekend. And, you know, they've got a couple of players there who are, you know, coming back from injury. Tonali made his first start. They've got, you know, a couple of players who weren't able to feature. And obviously, you know, the two City boys will come in now, you presume, at the weekend. There was just a fundamental lack of effort and fight about them that I think will scare a few Spurs fans, because that's the sort of thing that's supposed to be behind them. You know, that alarming capitulation and sort of drop off of the basics. Well, that's where you go and get De Zerbi and you sort of consign the last two league seasons, if you like, finishing 17th twice, to history, and you say, well, these are the standards we don't accept anymore. And they've had a lot of concerns about the culture in the dressing room and at the club, and I think you've seen in some of the outgoings that's part of the reason why some of those players have gone. Christian Romero is probably near the top of that list. And I think they felt they'd set those standards internally that would make sure that the kind of performance they gave at Brentford was a thing of the past. So, as ever, when you spend this kind of money, quickly the pressure shifts away from the board, who have had to put up with that for years, and rightly so, because you could always argue that Tottenham have prioritised their balance sheet as opposed to their team sheet. You can't really say that about them this summer. They have put their money where their mouth is, and now it's on the manager to mould a team and to get them up the table. And I think everybody will be looking at that Brentford performance and think, well, they've got to leave that an incredibly long way behind very, very quickly. Otherwise, as mad as it is to say it, De Zerbi does start to come under a bit of pressure, because that's the knock-on effect of such a big spend.
This is the perfect way back into bouncing back, though, isn't it? Against,
well, it's only one game, but I did say it's only one game, but I did say at the weekend, if Igor Tudor had been in charge of that team, you wouldn't have been surprised. That's how sort of rudderless they looked. In fact, Roberto De Zerbi on the touchline, as every goal went in, looked dumbfounded. Now, as Stevie and I were talking about it, I don't know what the reaction was, Because generally when you have a performance like that, the manager tears strips off you. But I don't know where we are with this Tottenham team. I don't know, and we know De Zerbi's that kind of character. Look, Spurs have been a big surprise for me because of all the things James talked about. Because they've not done what they've done this summer for a long, maybe not even ever. I thought they would have had a manager, like they did have an Antonio Conte, similar to De Zerbi, who bangs his fists, who's demonstrative, who demands. But Spurs, and the hierarchy has changed, Spurs have never really buckled to those demands. They've tampered with it a little bit, kind of half-heartedly. But they've never gone in, to my knowledge, certainly, in recent history, they've never gone in this manner. So they've secured safety, they secured De Zerbi on a long contract, they've gone out and spent, and now it's up to them. They don't need the weak players, the weak mentality that they've had over the past couple of seasons that we saw at Brentford at the weekend. And one of the things with Marmoush and Savio coming in, and one or two other players, is they are very talented players. But do they have the backbone? Has he got enough players with the backbone to drive the others forward? That's going to be one of the big questions, because I've signed a lot of talented guys, but talent alone doesn't get you to the end game. It's an exciting time, apart from Brentford, it's an exciting time for Tottenham, but he now, as James said, he's under pressure. We've spent big, now he has to mould this group into a team that can push for the top six. They have to be pushing for the top six, even though they were where they were last year. You spend that kind of money at a club the size of Tottenham, with that stadium, with this squad and this manager, you have to be pushing up to the top end of the table. And what we saw at the weekend was a million miles from that.
They're also said to be pushing for Cody Gakpo right now. He's emerged as one of the major storylines in this final days of the transfer windows. Man City apparently entering the picture too. What do you know about this, James?
Yeah, not loads. I know that the interest is genuine, and I know that the wide left position is something that Spurs have been looking at for quite some time. And again, my understanding was that De Zerbi had told them earlier in the summer that he wanted multiple wingers. So there's a lot there that fits. And yeah, you know, Gakpo again is does he take Spurs to another level? Probably not. But he knows the league. He has a level of quality and consistency that I think Spurs would probably, I guess, rate him as an upgrade on. But I don't know. I mean, you know, sort of Craig's point, I think, is right about the character. I always remember speaking to a couple of people at Spurs when Thomas Frank was there, and Frank and his coaching staff were quite critical about the lack of leadership that they had in the group. And I always got the sense that when he picked Christian Romero as captain, it was almost as if, who else do I go for? You know, like this, the dressing room is not full of those characters, full of those leaders. And I thought it was really interesting knowing that, to then see De Zerbi say, my five captains, Mickey van der Ven is now obviously club captain, Pedro Porro, Ben Davies, James Maddison and Archie Gray. And every single one of those players was there last season. And you sort of think, well, what has De Zerbi seen in that group that Thomas Frank didn't? You know, what has he seen about the characters in the dressing room? And I'm sort of stunned that Andy Robertson is not in that group, because again, the sort of talk about the reason why they would sign a player like that is because of his character, great leadership qualities, speaks really well to the press. You know, you would think if you're going to name five, he would have been nailed on for that, and he wasn't. And again, I'm not casting any aspersions over anybody. I'm trying to give a bit of information about the view of that squad previously, and the fact that De Zerbi's seen something different there is something I think to keep in mind as the next 2, 3, 4 months go by. You know, was Thomas Frank and his coaching staff wrong? Was there actually a leadership group there all along? Or is De Zerbi placing his faith in a group of players that let the last guy down and may let him down too? Who knows?
I'm glad it was a lot more simplistic. A leadership group back in the day was just we called them senior players. Senior players who ran the dressing room, and then, you know, if you were a youngster coming through, you listened. You know, Archie Gray's terrific young talent, but I've never heard him speak. Never, again, it goes back to the point. Tottenham barely got out of the relegation last year because they had a squad of players who didn't think or didn't even believe they deserved to be down there, and didn't have the mentality or the fight that you need when you're in a relegation battle. They had the talent, but they didn't have the other facets that you need, which is rolling your sleeves up. And you need a bit, and every team needs that. And I look at the players that have signed even in the middle of the park, and as experienced as he is, I wouldn't call Tonali a leader. But he had Guimaraes and he had Joe Linton beside him at Newcastle for long periods. One very, very experienced sitting in front of the back four, and the other one a bit of a warrior, really, in Joe Linton that can do multiple jobs. So you look even at that position, and you say, well, Rodrigo Bentancur should be a player he's not a leader. In fact, a lot of times he's a liability, the way that he charges around the field, a guy with so much experience and ability. And yet, if I was in the middle of the park, and I was saying this to Stevie, if I was in the middle of the park with Bentancur, I would be getting him by the scruff of the neck and saying, listen, you need to be here beside me, not charging around, getting yourself booked and making all these. And so you need, regardless of the talent that you sign, it all comes down to the fact that you need players within your team that can see the game and can talk and can organise. And that's going to be one of the several big questions for Tottenham and De Zerbi going forward, because I would question if they have that kind of individual within this locker room at this moment in time. I don't think they have. They've signed a lot of good players, but I don't think they've got a lot of, again, to go back to that point, I don't think they've got a lot of leadership.
On the Cody Gakpo point.
I think Stevie was talking about it the other night. Unless Liverpool have got a Barcola or others up their sleeve, they're not really in a position to be letting a guy go that's pretty consistent for them. He did have a period last year he didn't play particularly well, but a lot of times when you watch him play, he's one of the things that, as James mentioned, he would beef up the Tottenham squad, which is one of the things you have to have these days in most leagues, but particularly the Premier League. It's one of the things Arsenal really worked hard on, was they had a good first 11, and those couple of seasons that they went toe-to-toe with City but lost, but they beefed the squad up because Arteta knew that he needed to be able to go to the bench when somebody wasn't playing well or he had a suspension or an injury. And Tottenham absolutely need that. And I think Gakpo comes into that. He comes into that, place where he'll get you some goals, he'll work hard, he's got some physicality about him, but he won't probably always play, but he'll be a big part of the squad. The one thing I would say, if Liverpool sell him, they have to have somebody lined up. Otherwise, Areola's been left high and dry, because he was ultimately one of their best performers at Newcastle at the weekend.
Yeah.